Get on!
At 6:14 p.m. on a Sunday evening, inside Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, a black man wearing his Navy dress uniform walked through the main terminal alone. His name was Senior Chief Darnell Oae. He was 38 years old and an active-duty Navy SEAL with more than 16 years working in special operations. Less than 72 hours earlier, he had been rushed out of a secret mission inside Iranian territory. The details of that mission would never be made public. What people could see were the marks it had left on him: a bandaged right hand, a stitch cut above his left eyebrow, and eyes that had not closed in over 40 hours. He carried a duffel bag over one shoulder and a sealed military folder under his arm, stamped with Department of Defense security markings. He had been rerouted through Atlanta on a military transport connection and sent through the main terminal to catch a flight to Naval Station Norfolk, where a secret debriefing was waiting. The terminal was busy with the usual Sunday evening crowd: families coming back from vacations, business travelers catching late flights, and flight crews moving between gates. Oae moved through them with the steady, controlled walk of a man trained to keep going under conditions that would break most people. His pace was even, his eyes forward, his uniform neat despite everything he had been through. The ribbons on his chest told a story that most people in that terminal could not even begin to understand. He was not looking for attention. He was not causing a scene. He was a wounded serviceman trying to get from one gate to another inside his own country. He just wanted to get to his flight. Officer Craig Bellingham stood near the international arrivals area with a coffee in one hand and his radio on his shoulder. He was 42 years old and had worked with the Atlanta Airport Police Department for 16 years. In that time, 31 complaints had been filed against him, mostly by Black and Latino travelers, for stopping people without good reason, searching them when he didn't need to, and detaining them aggressively when nothing was wrong. Every single complaint had been looked into by the department and cleared. Some were dismissed as misunderstandings. Others were filed away with vague notes about high-pressure situations. None of them ever stuck. Among certain co-workers, Bellingham had earned the nickname the Gatekeeper. He wore it with pride, never really understanding the disgust behind it. His partner that evening was Officer Nolan Fitch, 29 years old, 5 years on the job. Fitch was quieter and more careful, and had learned early on that questioning Bellingham's decisions was not something you did twice. He stayed one step behind, watching the crowd, following Bellingham's lead without question. Bellingham's eyes moved across the terminal the way they always did, scanning, sorting, and deciding who belonged and who didn't. And then his eyes locked on one traveler in particular, a black man in a Navy dress uniform, walking through the terminal with a duffel bag and a sealed envelope under his arm. Bandaged hand, cut above his eyebrow. Tired eyes. Most people in that terminal would have seen a wounded serviceman coming home. Bellingham didn't. He saw a black man in a uniform that didn't feel right to him. He saw someone who didn't match his idea of what a senior chief was supposed to look like. He saw a target, and he was already moving. Bellingham stepped directly into Oae's path. The space between them was less than 2 feet. "Hey, hold up. Where are you coming from?" Oae stopped. His posture stayed straight, his tone respectful. "Military travel, sir. I'm connecting through to Norfolk." Bellingham's eyes moved slowly over the dress uniform, the ribbons, the bandaged hand, and the sealed envelope under Oae's arm. He did not step back. "You look like trouble. Where did you get that injury?" Oae kept his voice calm. "I'm returning from an overseas assignment. I have my military ID and travel orders, if you'd like to verify them." Bellingham held out his hand. "Let me see." Oae reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out his military ID and folded travel documents. Bellingham looked at them the way someone looks at something he has already decided is fake. He turned the ID over, looked at the photo, looked back at Oae, then shook his head. "These could be fake. Guys buy these online all the time." "They're not fake, sir. You can verify them through. I'll decide what I verify." Bellingham handed the ID to Fitch without looking at him. Oae's jaw tightened slightly. "I'd like to speak with a supervisor." Bellingham's expression changed. "You don't get to make demands. Put the bags down, both of them." OAE lowered the duffel to the floor, but he kept the sealed folder under his arm. Sir, this document is classified military material. I am not allowed to hand it over to civilian law enforcement. Bellingham stepped closer. His voice dropped, but it was still loud enough for the nearby travelers, who were starting to slow down and watch, to hear. I don't care what you call it. You put it down, or I'll put you down. Fitch shifted his weight behind them. His eyes moved to the growing number of phones being raised across the terminal. He said nothing. OAE placed nothing else on the ground. He held the folder steady under his arm, his voice calm and clear. This document is classified. I am not authorized to release it. That was the last full sentence he got out before Bellingham grabbed his arm. The grip was hard and fast, fingers locking around the same wrist that was already wrapped in bandaging. OAE did not pull away. He did not shift his weight. He said, I am not resisting. This document is classified. Bellingham twisted the arm upward. The bandage tore slightly, and OAE's jaw clenched, but he stayed still. Then Bellingham drove his open hand into OAE's upper back and shoved him forward. OAE's knees hit the floor first, then his shoulder, then the side of his face. The sealed folder slid across the terminal floor, spinning to a stop near a row of seats. The sound of the impact echoed through the terminal. A woman gasped. A child near the window started crying. Fitch moved in fast and pinned OAE's legs to the floor. Bellingham dropped his knee between OAE's shoulder blades and pulled both arms behind his back. The bandage on OAE's hand tore open completely. Blood spread across the white tile. Stop resisting, Bellingham shouted. I have not moved, OAE said. His cheek was pressed flat to the floor. His breathing was controlled. You are on camera. Bellingham leaned in close. The body camera on his chest was blinking red. It picked up every word. Guys like you always have a story. A uniform doesn't make you somebody. The terminal had gone quiet. A wall of phones surrounded them. A retired Marine colonel wearing a veteran's cap stepped forward, his voice firm. That man is in a Navy uniform. Let him go right now. A young woman near the gate had her phone raised and was live streaming. The viewer count was already in the thousands. A white man in a business suit announced loudly, I'm an attorney, and what I'm watching is against the law. Fitch leaned toward Bellingham, voice low. Craig, maybe we should check with his supervisor. Bellingham didn't look at him. He tightened the handcuffs and stood up. Airport Police Sergeant Vanessa Traz came around the corner of Concourse B at a fast walk, called over by Bellingham's radio message and the sound of raised voices carrying down the terminal. She was 44 years old, had been on the job for 18 years, and had supervised enough shifts to know the difference between a real situation and an officer creating one. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. A black man in a full Navy dress uniform was face down on the terminal floor, blood on the tile beneath his hand, handcuffs on his wrists, a knee mark still visible on the back of his jacket, 2 officers standing over him, and a sealed military folder lying 10 feet away on the ground near a row of plastic seats, with security markings facing up for anyone to see. Traz moved fast. She stepped between Bellingham and the crowd, looked down at OAE, then back at Bellingham. Get him up. Now. Bellingham didn't move. He's not cooperating. Traz crouched slightly and picked up the military ID that Fitch was still holding. She read the name, the rank, and the unit. Senior Chief Petty Officer, Naval Special Warfare. She stood up slowly and looked Bellingham directly in the eyes. Her voice dropped low enough that only he and Fitch could hear. Craig, do you have any idea what you've done? Bellingham's jaw tightened. He started to speak. Take the cuffs off. Now. Bellingham didn't move. Traz didn't blink. That was not a request, officer. Fitch stepped forward and removed the handcuffs. OAE rose slowly from the floor. His right hand was bleeding freely now, the bandage completely torn away. The cut above his eyebrow had opened back up. He flexed his fingers, wincing, and looked at Traz. She met his eyes. Senior Chief, I'm Sergeant Traz. I'm calling for medical help and my commanding officer right now. She walked to the folder, picked it up carefully by the edges, and secured it under her arm. Then she keyed her radio. Chief Pratt, this is Traz, Concourse B. I need you here immediately. We have a situation involving an active duty special operations service member and classified military documents. Traz walked OAE down a side hallway and into a small conference room used for internal meetings. She offered him water and a chair. He took both. His posture was still straight, but the exhaustion was pulling at him now. More than 40 hours without sleep, a reopened wound, and the adrenaline slowly fading from his body. Airport Chief Julius Pratt arrived within minutes. He was in his late 50s, calm and careful, and the moment he stepped into the room and saw the security markings on the sealed folder, his expression changed. He picked up the phone and dialed the Department of Defense contact number. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. His voice was tight the entire time. "Yes, sir. Active duty naval special warfare. Classified material was on the floor of a public terminal. Body camera was rolling." He hung up and looked at Traz. Within 20 minutes, 2 men in regular suits walked through the terminal without stopping at any checkpoint. One was from NCIS. The other carried credentials from the Defense Intelligence Agency. They secured the folder first. Then they asked to see the body camera footage. The playback started in a closed room down the hall. It showed everything. The stop with no reason, the profiling comments, the refusal to accept valid military ID, the grab, the twist, the shove, and the sound of OAE's body hitting the floor, the blood, the knee, and then the voice. Clear and unmistakable. Guys like you always have a story. A uniform doesn't make you somebody. It also showed the classified folder sliding across a public terminal floor, visible to every camera and phone in the area. A possible intelligence leak, caused entirely by one officer's decision to put a decorated serviceman on the ground. The DIA officer stepped out of the room and made one phone call. His voice was flat. "We have a compromised asset situation and an assault on an active operator. Start federal jurisdiction." He hung up and walked back inside. Pratt looked at Traz, pulled Bellingham and Fitch off duty immediately. Radios, weapons, badges, body cameras, everything. The NCIS agent added, without looking up from the screen, "And nobody talks to them before we do." A federal attorney reviewing the footage in Washington that same hour said it plainly. "This isn't just misconduct. This is a federal crime on at least 4 counts." By the time the sun set over Atlanta that evening, the live stream from the terminal had crossed 2 million views and was still climbing. The young woman who had started recording near the gate had not stopped. Her footage showed everything from a civilian's point of view: the shove, the blood, the handcuffs, the crowd's reaction, and the moment Traz arrived and shut it down. News outlets began calling the airport's communications office before the body camera footage had even finished its first internal review. Local news stations ran the story at 10 p.m. Cable networks picked it up by midnight. By morning, it was national news. The Pentagon released an official statement within hours. It was unusually fast and unusually direct. An active duty senior chief petty officer returning from a classified overseas operation was subjected to a racially motivated attack by civilian law enforcement. The Department of Defense is fully cooperating with federal authorities and will make sure there is full accountability. In Washington, behind closed doors, the words were not so careful. A senior defense official stood before a room full of military attorneys and investigators and said what the press release could not. He was pulled out under fire from a hostile country. He survived something most people in this building will never have to face. And then he had his face put on the floor of an American airport because of the color of his skin. This ends careers. This ends freedom. There was no discussion after that. Only action. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation. Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General launched a separate inquiry into airport police operations at Hartsfield-Jackson. NCIS formally took over the criminal investigation, pulling it away from local authorities completely. That same night, Senior Chief Darnell, OAE, sat in a quiet room at the airport and gave his full statement to a federal agent. His voice was steady. His memory was exact. He described every word Bellingham had said, every moment of physical contact, and every second of the encounter from beginning to end. The agent listened without interrupting. When OAE finished, the agent closed his notebook and said, That's one of the clearest statements I've ever taken. OAE nodded once. I was trained to remember details under pressure. Officer Craig Bellingham was placed on unpaid suspension the following morning. His badge was taken. His firearm was secured. His access card was shut off. He was told not to contact any member of the department or anyone involved in the investigation. He drove home in silence. Within 48 hours, his 31 prior complaints were pulled from internal files and placed under federal review. What the department had spent 14 years pushing aside, the federal government began examining closely, and then the victims started coming forward. A black airline pilot named Captain Solomon Abra was the first to speak publicly. He described being stopped by Bellingham 2 years earlier while walking through the terminal in full uniform with his crew. Bellingham had detained him for 45 minutes, questioning whether his credentials were real, refusing to call the airline to confirm, and only letting him go after a gate supervisor stepped in. Abra said he had filed a complaint. It was marked resolved with no action taken. A Latino TSA supervisor named Hector Padilla came forward next. He described being accused by Bellingham of trespassing inside the terminal where he had worked for 9 years. Bellingham had demanded to see his employee badge, called it suspicious, and threatened to have him removed. Padilla had filed a formal complaint. It disappeared into the same internal system that had swallowed every other complaint before it. Then came a black mother named Simone Achebe. She had been traveling alone with her 8-month-old son when Bellingham pulled her aside for a random search. The search lasted over 30 minutes. She missed her flight. Her baby cried the entire time. She said Bellingham told her that if she had nothing to hide, she wouldn't be so upset. She filed a complaint through the airport's public contact office. She never received a response. 14 victims in total came forward within the first 2 weeks. Each story followed the same pattern. A person of color stopped without reason, a made-up justification, an aggressive encounter, a complaint filed and buried. Internal emails came out during the federal review that confirmed what every victim already knew. Supervisors were aware. One email from a lieutenant, sent 3 years earlier, read clearly, Bellingham's numbers are high, but he keeps the terminal clean. Let it go. That email would become the centerpiece of the federal investigation, not because of what it said about Bellingham, but because of what it proved about the department. They knew. They always knew, and they chose to look the other way. Craig Bellingham sat in his living room under the terms of his suspension. The television was on. His name was at the bottom of the screen. It had been there every day for weeks. His wife had stopped answering the phone. His former co-workers had completely distanced themselves. The union that had supported him through 31 complaints over 14 years had gone silent. No statement, no legal fund, nothing. Every day, new coverage appeared. Another interview with a previous victim. Another legal expert breaking down the body camera footage frame by frame. Another segment about the classified folder that slid across a public terminal floor because one officer decided a black man in a dress uniform didn't look right. Outside the federal courthouse, protesters gathered with large printed images from the body camera footage. Bellingham's knee on OAE's back, the blood on the tile, the folder on the ground with security markings visible. Inside, attorneys prepared for what analysts were calling one of the clearest federal civil rights cases in recent memory. The Pentagon had not taken back its statement. Federal monitors had already been assigned to the airport police department before any verdict had been reached. OAE had not spoken publicly since his statement to NCIS. He had returned to limited duty at Naval Special Warfare Command. His commanding officer had made clear that the Navy considered the matter far from over. The body camera footage had crossed 30 million views. It had been entered into federal evidence. It would be played in a courtroom. Every frame, every word, every second of a decorated Navy SEAL's face pressed to the floor of an American airport while bleeding from wounds he received serving his country. And somewhere between a federal investigation and charges that could reach 20 years, a man who survived being pulled out of a hostile country under fire sat in his uniform, waiting for a system that had already failed him on a terminal floor to decide whether it would fail him again. The cameras were still rolling. The world was still watching. And this story was not over. If the story moved you, don't just watch in silence. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.